Hello, Renegade marketers. If this is your first time listening, welcome. And if you're a regular listener, welcome back. Before I present today's episode, I am beyond thrilled to announce that our second in-person CMO Super Huddle is happening November 6th and 7th, 2025 in Palo Alto. Last year, we brought together 101 marketing leaders for a day of sharing, caring, and daring each other to greatness. And we're doing it again. Same venue, same energy, same ambition to challenge convention with an added half-day strategy lab exclusively for marketing leaders. We're also excited to have Trust Radius and Boomerang as founding sponsors for this event. Early bird tickets are now available at cmohuddles.com. You can even see a video there of what we did last year. Grab yours before they're gone. I promise you we will sell out, and it's going to be flocking awesomer. You're about to listen to a career huddle where our flocking awesome community, CMO Huddles, gets exclusive access to the authors of some of the world's best-selling business books. At this huddle, we were joined by Bob Moesta, co-founder of the Rewired Group and author of Demand Side Sales 101. Bob shares how understanding why customers buy, not just why you sell, can change how you build products, market them, and create demand. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. You'll be supporting our quest to be the #1 B2B marketing podcast. All right, let's dive in. Hello, Huddlers. I'm thrilled to welcome Bob Moesta to our session today. Bob is an adjunct lecturer at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management and a guest lecturer at Harvard Business School. When you read his book, you'll get, this is what's interesting here, is there used to be no people who were professors of sales, and one of Bob's sort of life missions has been to elevate sales as a profession. And he's done it. He's helped launch 3,500 new products and services across nearly every industry imaginable, from defense and automotive to software, financial services, and education. Grew up as a kid with dyslexia. That sort of drove a lot of the things that he did. And he is the author of this book, Demand Side Sales, which offers, I think, a fresh perspective on how to understand and connect with customers. Now, Bob, first of all, how are you and where are you?
I'm in my hometown. I'm in Detroit, Michigan, born and raised. I've lived here my entire life, and I plan to live here the rest of my life. So this is my home. This is my home base. I've done 7 startups. I've started companies in other cities because it's easier to work 20 hours a day when you're somewhere else, when you have a family, and then you come home to the family. And so I've always basically had this home base, but I travel quite a bit.
I love it. All right. Okay. So we've established where you are. Awesome. Let's do one thing I like to do just in case the audience needs to leave early or we need to convince them to stay. Can you provide sort of 3 very short bulleted insights about sales that you'd love B2B CMOs to understand? And we'll go through them one at a time after your list.
Number 1, people buy differently than how we sell. Most people don't understand that. And to realize, like, understanding the buyer journey and understanding what causes people to say today's the day they want your product or service, that's what you need to figure out. The second part is that context and outcome. Context creates value and contrast creates meaning. So it's this aspect of knowing the situation your customer is in, or what has to happen to your customer to make them ready for you, right? Okay. And so a lot of times we keep marketing to people when they're not ready for us. And so we just waste our money, right?
Interesting. Okay, is there a third?
Yeah, the third is that the fact is there is no ideal customer. Right? There's a whole bunch of different customers, and you have to realize that ultimately we have to learn to make trade-offs. And so ultimately people keep trying to build the ideal thing, the ideal customer, the ideal product, the ideal whatever. But the reality is what we have to actually really understand is what trade-offs do customers make, and how do we actually understand how to mimic their trade-offs into our product and services.
Okay. All right. That's a lot to unpack, and I'm excited to do it. I almost want to start with the third, but let's go back to the first one. So people buy differently. And again, this is we're in B2B land, and I know there are a lot of folks who see B2B and B2C as similar, but I think you and I talked about it. There are a lot of differences. One is buying committees and so forth. So
that's right.
So let's talk about, in the context of B2B,
Yes.
What you see in terms of the difference between how people buy and how people sell.
Yeah. So the first thing is I'll tell you that in my first B2B is we literally set up a way in which to sell the way we wanted to sell. And then we tried to get people to buy from us that way. Right. And that's kind of the first mistake I made, to really say like, okay, I need to understand how they want to buy, because ultimately they don't want to hear all my features and benefits, because in certain situations, there's only 3 or 4 that are relevant to them. And the moment I tell them too many, they think I'm too expensive.
Right. If you give
Right?
your laundry list, well, we do this and this and this.
Yeah. And they're
it
like,
came
yeah,
in
I don't
for
need
us.
all that. I only need this. Can I get a 20% discount? Right?
Yeah.
So part of this is being able to tune the pitch to the context that people are in. Right. And so understanding that is really, really important. And so I start by, so for example, one of the things I did is I built houses, right? And I didn't go interview people who wanted to buy a house. I interviewed people who bought my houses. What caused them to say today's the day that they need a new house? It's not random. Nobody buys any product randomly, ever. And so this is the thing is the sales process is set up is, if I have 100 people, 100 leads, I can get, 25 conversations that give me 14 proposals that can get me to, 25 or 10 meetings that gets me to 3 closes. Like, they treat it as it's probability theory, but that's just not right. Sales is not about probability. Sales is about causality. What causes somebody to buy? And so we need to study the people who have actually come to us, and we actually need to study the people who left us, because the people who leave us are just as important, because we learn there's a lot of people who, I'll say, the phrase I use is people bitch, but they don't switch. So these are the people who go like, oh, it'd be great if you had this feature. Oh my God, that'd be great if you had that feature. But one, you can't charge any more for it. And two is the fact is ultimately the fact is they'll probably never use it. The thing is to actually study the people who have churned from you. You'll actually see what causes people to literally say that this is important enough to go build it. So I never build features or products on things that people just tell me about. I need to actually see them try and have an effort to solve that problem before I actually build that feature.
It's so funny. There's a famous story. I don't know if I mentioned this in a pre-call, but I've done it on this with this group before. Famously, Dell surveyed all its customers and said, hey, what kind of things would you like us to buy? Yeah. And they said, a Linux laptop. So they said, great. Okay, we'll build a Linux laptop. Yeah. And it was like their worst selling in the history.
So this is the other part of this is people don't really know what they want. Somehow we think they do. And we literally listen to their words with a level of precision that is 10 times more precise than they're sending it to us. So they'll say, oh, I want it to be convenient. And like, oh, 1,000 people said they want it to be more convenient. And then we go in and try to interpret what convenient means. And there's 40 different definitions of it and all these different things we can do. But nobody asks like, what do you mean by it convenient? Give me an example of convenient. Give me an example of what's too hard. Because most people can't tell you what convenient is. They can tell you what too hard is.
Interesting. So yeah, and your book spends a lot of time talking about getting deeper in these conversations.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we keep going through it. So, because we're going to come back to this getting deeper. But so let's make sure we cover the second point, which was context creates value and
context creates meaning.
Meaning.
So here's the thing is, if you give somebody one proposal, there's not enough context for them to know what to do. 62% of all proposals in B2B go unanswered because they have no contrast. And so what happens is what I do is, for example, is I give them 3 different ways in which we can implement. I give them 3 different approaches. People need 3s. This is what most people don't understand. If you really study how buyers buy, they use 3 as the first thing they do is they actually look at all 3. And the first thing they do is eliminate one of the 3, right? And so now they have confidence about the one they eliminated. And then they compare the last 2, not to each other, but to the one they actually made a decision about. And so they eliminate the second. And so ultimately they'll say, oh, I want A. But the reality is they don't want A. They just eliminated B and C. And so we have to actually sit in the shoes of the customers. We have to be empathetic to how they think. And so ultimately, without actually sitting in their shoes, we end up feeling like we have to tell them everything, show up and throw up. And it doesn't work.
I love that. Show up and throw up. I would, knowing a number of the folks that are present with us today and others that will be listening later on, they know they need to study the customer journey. There's no doubt that they would say, I already knew this. I know I got to know my customer better. But nonetheless, it feels like there's another layer to this, which you're saying is you don't know the customer as well as you think you do because you're not asking the right questions in the right way. Is that a fair interpretation of?
That's a little more confident or arrogant than I would state it. What I would say is the fact is we are more obsessed with our product than them.
Right.
And the reality is the more we can become obsessed with them. So for example, in home building, what I realized is one of the biggest struggling moments for people who are buying my downsize or condos, basically people who are retiring, is that they'd never moved in 20 years. And so the whole thought of moving was so daunting that the fact is I included moving and 2 years of storage so they could actually sort through this thing and actually do it. I grew sales almost 28% by offering something that was really nothing that I do as a builder, but it's something that's part of the moving process that is actually really essential for basically having people buy my condos.
And that's so interesting. And I love that story. And I was just thinking about it. It's like, my wife and I lived in this apartment for more than 20 years. And we keep talking about Swedish death cleaning because God forbid our kids had to deal with this. And it's a great insight. But the thing that I like more about the insight is that you created a solution that was more than what you were selling. And I think oftentimes, and I talk to a lot of folks that sell a SaaS product, and there's a high multiple for a sort of SaaS product without actually providing the service. The service, you get a low multiple. Yet often it is the combination of the product and the service you provide that creates this sort of stickiest bond with a customer. But they don't want to talk about service because
we're not in the service business. What I learned is, for example, as a builder, I might be a builder on the supply side. Like my business and my processes are set up to build homes. So from a supply side perspective, that's what I do. But ultimately on the demand side, I'm a mover. My job is to help somebody move from their old house to a new house. And what I learned is that I could actually help sell their old house as well. And so their old house needed fixing. And so as much as I did 1,000 homes, new homes in Detroit, I actually fixed up 500 used homes, because if I'm a mover, my thing is all I got to do is figure out how to get people to move from one house to another, from an apartment to somewhere else, from a manufactured home into a house. I mean, there's all these things we found. And so you start to look at the market completely differently if you actually reframe it from the demand side of the world.
And that is, so the context creates value is what exactly that notion right there that you just went.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So the context they're in actually it helps us understand what value means to them.
So I'm hoping that this is inspiring folks to think about their customers a little bit differently and how they go about getting to know them. Now, which gets us to the third point that you brought up, which is there is no ideal customer. We got to unpack that, because everybody talks about their ICP. I mean, it's like, it's hard to have a call. Well, our ICP is this, and we see the intent data on this ICP, and we're going to now we know that person, because they're on our target list, is a prime customer. We better get a rep on the phone with them right away.
That's right. But we don't know anything about their context. We know nothing about their struggling moments. We know nothing about what they're really struggling with. And so part of it is we describe ideal customers by the demographics and psychographics of the company they might be with. But that doesn't mean they're ready to buy. It doesn't mean they have any problems. And so you start to realize that ultimately it's about the trade-offs that we have to make. And so understanding kind of the trade-offs the consumer makes. So for example, when I surveyed people in the home building industry, which to be honest, I was forced to do by kind of the previous system that I inherited. And it would be like, oh, I want an Energy Star compliant. It was the number one requested feature was an Energy Star compliant home. And ultimately the fact is it costs us $42,000 to make the home Energy Star compliant. And as much as I put it in, everybody was excited for it. We sold 0 of them. And what happened is what I realized is the trade-off was, do I actually make it Energy Star compliant, which means I got to stay in this home for over 12 years to break even, or do I finish my basement, which was also $40,000? Turns out everybody finished the basement. And so this is where all of a sudden you start to realize what they say they want and what they want is very different. And so one of the things that I learned, and to be honest, again, remember, I'm an engineer. I've been building things my whole life. So this is almost like an engineer's view of sales, right? Take that for what it's worth. But there's an emotional, social, and functional components. And ultimately, I had to go learn not marketing research techniques. I went and learned criminal and intelligent interrogation methods, because ultimately consumers lie. They lie to themselves, let alone lie to you. And so part of this is being able to understand what they mean and why they're saying what they're saying, so you can sit in their shoes. So I treat these interviews as if I'm trying to be an understudy to basically play them in a play in another situation. So I have to know how they're going to say, the patterns they're going to speak, who's in charge, all of that, right?
I also, the minute you went to criminals, of course, and I saw you referenced Chris Voss comes to mind.
Chris
we had
Voss's
him.
stuff is amazing.
Yeah.
I started a book on that, and then I read his book, and I'm like, yeah, I don't need to do this. This is perfect. He's very good at what he does. But
what's so funny on that one is, so we had Chris on a career huddle and ultimately a podcast, and I had listened to his book actually twice, and it's a professional announcer. So when you actually meet him, it's like, he doesn't sound anything like, it's funny because he has this wonderful voice, and the narrator is amazing. Anyway, the other thing that you said.
Let me just hit the one point that's really important in that one is like when I'm doing these interviews, for example, I'll play back what they told me incorrectly because I want to get to know. Getting to know is the moment they say yes, there's no other question you can ask. And so ultimately, when I'm trying to talk to customers, I want them to say, no, that's not it. And then fix it for me because now you get more details. And so one of the hardest parts of this skill is actually playing dumb. I might know the answer, and I know that they're saying is wrong, but I need to hear their words for it, not my words.
The famously Columbo technique.
Exactly.
It's funny. I know a market researcher, an interviewer who does that all the time and uses it to great effect where he'll ask an innocently stupid question. You did say, Joe, before we wrap up on this third point, and I think there's a lot, you talked about the fact that there's no ideal customer. There's a lot of difference, and we have to think about them differently. Let's talk about that a little bit more. You mentioned something like 94% or not. I wasn't sure what that.
62% of most B2B proposals go unanswered because they don't have any contrast.
Okay, so that was one, but there was another point just about this not being being an ideal customer. And this is I'm going to state what I hear.
Yeah,
CMOs,
please.
Which is, we do have an ideal customer profile because we can look at our last 10 wins, and they were all companies that were 500 million to $1 billion. They were all this kind of structure. The first area started from a marketing ops person who was trying to solve this particular problem. And oh, by the way, we also had a lot of intent signals because they were at review sites. They were at all these other places. So we kind of know that they're in the market for it too. That's what they would say to
That's right. That's how. So what I call that is that's aggregating or averaging all the things around the last 10 clients. And when you average it out, they don't exist. So when you go to find them, they're not there. And so part of this is to realize that at some point in time, and just because they're 500 million, that doesn't cause them to say today's the day they want your product. And so this is what I'm saying is we end up building personas. We end up building, all these different kinds of aggregated views of customers, but that's actually they're all just made up. I would tell you, just go talk to 10 customers. You'll learn more talking to 10 customers and seeing the patterns across 10 customers than you would by actually trying to aggregate all that information.
Interesting. So you mean that when the survey says there are 2.3 kids, there aren't a 0.3 kid that we can find?
That's exactly right. So what you want to do is interview, why do people have kids?
Hell of a good question. One that we are not going to be able to answer.
I was going to say, we don't want to, but this is the point is we're asking the wrong question.
So fascinating. And let's go deeper on that because that's a big part of your book. And I think it will help folks understand what you're talking about because you actually do a lot of Q&As and so forth and role playing in the book. Let's, if we can, do that in the context of a B2B interview. And I think it's tricky because you have, in B2B, you might have a user who's using the product. You'll have a buyer, you'll have an approver, you'll have a tech person, you'll have a security person, you'll have the CFO. Maybe even it'll get as high as the executive because it's a big purchase. So there's a lot of different people along the way. And, are we going to have 10 interviews with every type of those?
I only interview one person. I actually probably need two. But the one person I talk to is, who is the person taking the political risk to change the system? That's the only person who's actually creating the energy to make it happen. Everybody else is there to say no. And all I have to do is not get them say no, but I don't need them to say yes. I just need to make sure they don't say no. And so you start to realize that if I try to aggregate everybody's point of view, it's almost like we have to be a family therapist, right? Because so-and-so wants this and somebody else wants that and somebody else gets that. It's really about what's the business problem we're trying to solve And what's the trade-offs you're willing to make in order to make that happen? This is where people would go like, oh, well, we're worried about speed of this thing and blah, and they're going on. And next thing you know, it's like, well, it's got to pass our security protocol. It's like, okay. And all of a sudden it turns out it doesn't meet their security protocol. But it's such a good thing. They're saying, we're going to put it outside the firewall. We're going to treat it this way and do this way. Next thing you know, they're using it. So the objections don't become objections. The objections are really trade-offs you have to learn how to manage.
So I think the person that takes the political risk, often CMOs will call this the champion.
Yes.
Right.
The sponsor, the champion, that kind of. But ultimately, these are the people, if you think about it, that this purchase is caused, I only talk to people who actually were responsible for causing it. The other thing is again, as an engineer, one of the reasons why I got so deep into sales is because as I build product, I had to realize I have to build the product for two people. I have to build it for the user and I have to build it for the buyer. But turns out that the user usually has very little voice in any of this. Very little voice. And so I can build the most user-friendly thing in the world, but the buyer's not willing to pay an extra dime for it. Right? And so,
yeah,
and by the
way,
way,
unless you're sort of in the PLG world where you get a bunch of end user to buy it, and then
there's some exceptions,
right.
But what I'm saying though is that what'll happen is the reason why you'll get fired is because the users can't use it. The reason why you get hired is because the buyer can buy it. And so you have to actually learn how to manage the trade-offs between the buyer and the user. So think of like Salesforce, right? The reason why people buy Salesforce is I want to see the sales process. I want the data for all of everything that's going on. I want to be able to see the entire process. The problem is that the user who's the salesperson literally hates it. Right? And so what we said is we got to, and everybody had their own sales in the early days, everybody has their own sales approach. And so you're trying to unify the sales approach. And then when you actually do that, everybody's running two systems and your sales will go down if you actually burden the salespeople too much. So don't actually try implementing all the stuff that the buyer wants up front, but say, here's how we're going to get there. And here's early things we're going to do to help the users, which are the salespeople, use this so we can get that data you really want to see. Negotiate the buyer against the user because they don't have the same needs.
So interesting. There is a target audience here in your theory, right?
Yeah. It's a target who, when, where, and why. It's situations people find themselves in. This is where you look across wide demographics and it turns out that the same underlying mechanisms are there that cause them to buy your product. And so what you want to do is understand those mechanisms of what has to happen to somebody for them to even see you. You have to realize there's a process of how people buy. The first thing is called first thought. The reality is the first thought is a question that you put in somebody's brain to basically say, like, could this be better? Is this really efficient enough? You know, like, and the moment that they have the space. So, but my mentor, Clay Christensen, would say, questions create spaces in the brain for solutions to fall into. So we shouldn't start by leading with our product. We should be starting with what's the one thing you struggle with that you would love to actually fix that would move the needle next year.
And I wonder, as folks are listening to this, if they know the answer to that right now.
Right.
And I wonder if they went to and did some interviews, they would pretty quickly find what that one thing is. And it might surprise them.
That's exactly right. And it turns out there's not one thing, there's usually 3 or 4 things. And so you have to understand that people and so I call it, the framework is called jobs to be done, and that people don't buy products, they hire products and services to make progress in their life. And so what progress is the sponsor trying to make? And how is it trying to help the business? And ultimately, what are they struggling with? If there's no struggling moment, there is no demand. You can't convince somebody to buy something they don't need.
Struggling moment is such a great phrase. I think it's a powerful framework for folks to think about.
And I want to contrast it to 2 things. This is not a pain. This is not a pain point. A pain point is basically kind of one of many struggles that they have. And so you have to actually realize that it's kind of like their knee finally hurts, but they've got a lot of other problems going on that you've got to be able to see the whole thing, because otherwise they're just going to think it's the knee. And the reality is the problem's bigger than that. The second part is the reason why it's called struggling moment is because that's the very first moment where people realize they have to do something different. They have to do something new. Buying something is about changing something that's broken. And it could be broken because we're not reaching the opportunity we have. It's like there's a dark side and there's an upside. We call it the context and the outcome. What's the outcome they're seeking, which is not necessarily the same as solving the problem. So people assume symmetry between problem and solution or problem and outcome. But the reality is they're not necessarily symmetrical.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. This show is brought to you by CMO Huddles, the only marketing community dedicated to B2B greatness and that donates 1% of revenue to the Global Penguin Society. Why? Well, it turns out that B2B CMOs and penguins have a lot in common. Both are highly curious and remarkable problem solvers. Both prevail in harsh environments by working together with peers, and both are remarkably mediagenic. And just as a group of penguins is called a huddle, our community of over 300 B2B marketing leaders huddle together to gain confidence, colleagues, and coverage. If you're a B2B CMO, why not dive into CMO Huddles by registering for our free starter program on cmohuddles.com. Hope to see you in a huddle soon. So I want to go back because you've said a couple of things.
Yep.
And I just want to repeat it. They're changing. They're looking at change. There's the struggling moment. Something's broken, and they've figured that out. Now, there are times where people don't know that they're having a struggling moment. And sometimes in the world of category creation, people try to sort of dangle out, hey, there is this problem you may not have even thought about before.
But it has to have some consequences. It has to have some upside. It has to be just saying that it's a problem doesn't actually make it we're solving. And so part of this is you have to actually understand their world. And most of the time we're trying to convince them of what's going on in their world when we don't really know what's going on in their world. As you know, the best salespeople don't talk, they listen. My belief is all the people who are here already know that. But that's the big thing is that the most junior salesperson just walks in and talks.
This is an interesting dynamic, and I'm just going to throw this out there right now and see how.
Yeah.
So there has always been and probably always will be tension between marketing and sales. Some of that tension is going away in the sense that it used to be there was a handoff where marketing would get this qualified opportunity and then pass it over. There's less of that and more of this is an opportunity for the company, not marketing or sales. We're going to manage and work with this opportunity all the way to the close. It doesn't matter who's in which department is doing. Because
I would include customer success in that as well. So it's marketing, sales, and customer success should actually be one organization. So I need customer success early in marketing, and I need marketing. I need marketing when I'm implementing. So for example, I've sold something to somebody and now it's being rolled out to the entire organization. I need marketing to help me talk about what it is. Marketing usually only helps me convince the buyer, but I have to convince all the users too. We put that on customer success, but customer success aren't marketers. They're functional people to basically tell you how everything works. But I got to still create some marketing message around why we're doing this.
Interesting.
And so I would much rather have a team of marketing, sales, and customer success in one team and have them work together than trying to actually have the handoff is a broken model to me. Right. I
don't think anybody would argue with you. And I think it's increasingly so. I mean, given the, new generation of buyers who aren't one experienced as buyers and two are self-serve oriented, self-serve first.
Yep.
It's really if they could, they would buy everything the way Amazon sells everything. Right.
So let me give you an example. So in the home building that I did, right, we were getting 1,000 leads a month, right? 1,000 leads. And ultimately, we would sell about 20 houses a month off those 1,000 leads. And what I realized is the leads we got were so bad that the fact is I said, we need to put a set of questions up front so we understand why are they serious about moving and what is it about. And so we went from, and I put this thing up front. And to be honest, our leads went from 1,000 a month to 200 a month. But my sales went from 20 a month to 80 a month. Because I was only getting and to be honest, I could actually cut my sales staff in half because I didn't have to have them look at all those people who were not even really interested at all anyways. And so this is where you start to realize when you click them together, they actually have similar alignment. But when you break them apart, marketing is about getting leads. It doesn't matter how many leads, the more leads, the better the leads. It's all good.
Yeah, there's this notion of coverage. Well, we have 10 BDRs and they close, they need to have 5-6 leads per month to work. And so therefore we need to bring those in and you back it up. And so the irony is we're increasingly seeing a lot of folks getting rid of that function and really trying to qualify better as you described it. And that's a great you cut your leads by 80% essentially from 1,000 to 200, and you quadrupled your close rate. I mean, that's math that I think any marketer would love.
The thing is, they have to be comfortable saying, you're not ready for us.
Yeah. And it's funny. I went to a trade show just a couple of weeks ago, and it was good, really great conference. And I visited a lot of booths because there was a lot of technology there, and I was and I talked to a bunch of them. Not one, and about 10 of them scanned my badge. All of them followed up with an email. Hey, Drew, great to meet you. The thing. Yeah. And I'm not a buyer in any of those circumstances. I'm an influencer, but I am not a buyer. And yet hey, let's set up a meeting so I could do a demo email. And it's like, and I created a standard response was, take me off your list. I don't want to waste your time or mine. Do a better job qualifying your leads.
One of the things we're doing in qualifying, so part of the framework is this notion of what we call forces of progress. There's things that have to happen to you that enable you to be ready. And so we talk about push forces, which are usually contextual things wrapped around you. There's pull forces, which are outcomes that you're seeking. And those are the fuel of the change. But then there's what we call the friction of the change, which is basically the anxiety of the new. What questions do they have? What worries do they have about the new? And the other is, what's the habit they have to give up in the past that will actually hinder them from actually doing it? So if they don't give up this, they're not going to be able to implement that. And so you start to realize that this becomes the salesperson's guide. And what we did is we actually, in Salesforce, we created what's pushing them, what's pulling them, what anxieties do they have, what trade-offs do they have to make, what habits do they have to give up. So we can, and if the salesperson couldn't answer those questions, they were nowhere near ready to close.
Let's talk about those in detail, because they're, again, really good pearls. They come right off your mouth, and I want to make sure that everybody gets it. So let's just go into the push. What more detail on that?
A push of the so for example, what causes somebody to buy a new house, right? So first of all, these are not one things. They're sets of things that have to happen to somebody that says today's the day. Part of it is so think about people downsizing houses. What has to happen for them to say it's time? Well, their kids have to move out of the house. The house is too big. The neighbors start to move away. Like there's all these different things that are pushing them to say, I got to change. In the B2B world, this is the tariffs are coming. The fact is we have inefficiencies. This machine broke. We have this opportunity to basically go into this new market. What's pushing them to start to look to do something new? And so ultimately that's a push. If there is no push, there is no struggling moment, there is no opportunity, there is nothing to sell. They can't see it. We just keep doing, we're creatures of habit. We'll keep doing what we're doing. So we need a push. But the moment we have a push, then we have an opposite on the other side, what I call the pull forces, which are the things that the outcomes you're seeking by doing this change. Am I seeking to grow the business? And am I seeking to be more efficient with my sales? Am I seeking to basically downsize my sales for what's the outcomes I want from this? And those two things are like, you could call them pain and gain, but pain and gain is very limited because sometimes there's no pain from it, but it's part of the context that actually creates the pain, right? You want to be able to have that all. The second half of this is the friction. The anxiety, objections, the things that they're worried about that would keep them from buying this. Like, so what's going to happen to all our data? How long is it going to take to port it over? What's the implementation time on this thing? Like all those anxieties. And what you start to realize is you can have a lot of push and a lot of pull, but if you have a lot of anxiety and a lot of habit, there's a lot of energy in the system, but it's not going anywhere. And so what I realized, for example, in the home building side is if I added moving and storage, I reduced the anxieties so much that I actually had to sell. It was easier to sell. Nobody wanted moving and storage because they know me as a builder, right? Nobody said, oh, I wish you could do that. Like I just literally saw that was one of the biggest struggling moments that they had so much anxiety about so that my builder down the road was giving free granite and hardwood, and I was giving moving and storage, and I outsold them 10-1.
It's so interesting that I think the data that I saw recently was that in B2B land, 60% of deals that are prospective deals they end up buying nothing.
Yep. Yes.
Which means all of those pitches, nobody figured out how to resolve the friction points.
That's correct. Or have enough push and pull, enough fuel to make the change. So sometimes it's a fuel change, not enough fuel will do it, but also too much friction will do it. And so part of it is thinking about it as a system. That's me as the engineer, thinking about the buyer as a system and saying what's operating on them. And it's social, emotional, and functional. This is where there's a big misunderstanding that they say that B2B is very, very transactional. And the reality is B2B is extremely emotional and extremely social. If I don't buy this, I will get fired. If I buy this and it screws up, I will get fired. That's very emotional.
So the risk of there's that high
There's a risk of not doing it, and there's a risk of doing it.
Right.
Both have emotion.
One could argue that fear is a lot of this.
And unknowns.
But it's so interesting because if you look at software that's going easily and getting purchased, it's generative AI. A lot of tools are getting bought and tested and so forth and there's very little friction. But there is an emotional part of it. It's a fear of being left behind.
That's right. And to be honest, this is where I quote another one of my mentors would say, don't ever confuse activity with productivity. My belief is everybody's trying to figure out AI, but there's very few people doing it. And most consumers don't want it. They just want the answer. Give me the answer. You used AI. That's great. I don't care.
Yeah, although I won't go there, right? Because I do think there's a lot of interesting implementations going on right now.
There are, and I want to be that case, but you have to realize that I work in everything from consumer packaged goods to software to banks and everything in between, and everybody's saying they need AI, but what they don't realize is how does the AI add value to the customer?
Right. Well, and there's a lot. Potentially, but it's disruptive because you've got, if people are going to AI search engines and they are stopping there and they're not doing their own homework, and suddenly they're telling you, here are the top 3 brands in this category.
That's right.
And you don't show up.
Well, the other thing is are they really ready to buy? Because the AI did all the work. Are they actually understanding why they really need this thing? And so they're reading it as opposed to feeling it. Very different.
Talk about that in a little more detail.
So a salesperson sitting across from you and talking you through the problem is very different than having an AI and you chatting, giving it information. And so you start to realize that at some point in time, the AI might be able to gather more information and summarize it, but it's still the AI's summary of it. It's not your summary of it. The salesperson's job is to actually get them to articulate their problem and say it's their problem. That's an emotional process.
Yeah. And I do wonder if that is being replaced by someone going into a ChatGPT and saying, here's my problem. What would you suggest I do? What's the path forward? And I feel like that enlightened users of these tools are doing that in B2B, in their purchase cycle.
Yes.
In fact, we know they are. Trust Radius just did a buying study, and then it's like it was 17% before, it's up to 30% of buyers are now using generative AI to help them narrow the field and do their homework and
so here's what I would tell you. It's helping them get ready to buy. This is their homework. We shouldn't think of this as a bad thing. Right. We should actually think that they're going to be actually more ready for us. And so part of this is to actually help them with, if the AI is giving them the good information, what did AI tell you? What do you believe it's going to, how did you think it's going to help? Why are we on the list? We're on the list because AI put, well, what did AI tell you? Why is that relevant to you right now? I really believe that the fact is that the thing that's most people still don't believe is that sales is human, and that it's probably the most human of all the things we do in terms of actually transacting. And so we can go when it's known. And it's like, so for example, if I'm going to the grocery store and I've bought Lay's potato chips before, I'm not actually buying anything new. It's just a repurchase, right? And so the reality is those are things we could actually get AI to help us with. But when we start to think about doing something new, we have to actually understand what is the cause of that. And there's fear and emotion around it. And they can study as much as they want, but the words aren't going to actually help them feel better.
Right. Okay. I want to make sure that we cover a couple of things that I really liked. Your tree visual, where the symptoms are the branches and the leaves, and the problem is the trunk and the causes are the roots. Talk a little bit about that framework and how B2B marketers can use it to better understand their customers.
So think about it as features and benefits. We keep talking about features and benefits, but the thing we should be leading with is the underlying causes of why they value the features and benefits. So most people start with the end, which is, let me tell you what we can do for you, as opposed to, let me tell you who we help. They have these kinds of problems. And so part of the tree analogy is to say that the benefits are only possible if they have the problem. And you need to realize that at some point, if the problem is deep, the solution is actually a big tree. And if the problem isn't that deep, then the fact is it's not a big tree.
There's some profundity in there, folks. I hope you're listening to that, that if they don't have that problem, it doesn't matter what you say. It's like if they don't perceive that, right?
But that's the 60%. We're talking at them as opposed to listening to them.
So I promised that we would go a little bit deeper on listening to them. Talk a little bit about the kinds of things that marketers could be doing, the questions in that process of questioning that you outlined so carefully in your book.
So I'm working on a new book called The Anatomy of a Great Question. Like, what does it take to do like when somebody goes, oh, that's a great question. Like, how do you do that? Right. And so part of this is to realize that you have to actually start to, that this is in some cases, it's a show for them, but it's also for you to learn. And so the questions have to be, one is they have to be empathetic. Two is you have to learn to mirror, right? If they speak fast, you speak fast. If they speak slow, you speak slow. Part of it is to basically make sure that they get comfortable. The other part is to typically I try to get names. So if they say their boss, I want to know who the boss is. Oh, the boss is Tracy. Okay, so what did Tracy think about that? Tracy gives you a notion that you're now familiar with the situation. If you keep saying you're a boss all the time, then the reality is like you're just an outsider. The other is we unpack to causation. There's 3 layers of language. And I always say the first layer is what I call the pablum layer. This is where you would say, oh, how was your day? It was good. It really wasn't good, or maybe it was good, but like good is to get you just to go away, right? But then the next layer is the question would be, so what was so good about it? And they go, oh, it really wasn't good. Okay, well, what's so bad about it? And then they go into what I call the fantasy nightmare layer. This is where they exaggerate beyond belief about they add the emotional aspect of how bad their day was or how good their day was. And then ultimately the fact is you got to get down to like, well, what caused it? And the causation, think of it as what are the dominoes that had to fall for that to happen? And when we understand the causation of it, now we can actually figure out what to do with it. But if I'm at the pablum layer, I can't do anything. I'm at the fantasy layer, I end up overestimating or underestimating, right? I got to get down to the causal layer of what's causing them to even look today.
I seem to recall a sort of Japanese thing about the 6 whys, getting the why, the why, the why.
5 whys, yeah. Yep.
5
so
whys.
I at 18 years old, I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. Deming, who was the father of quality. And he took me to Japan, and I learned all my methods and tools for engineering in Japan. And that's where a lot of this has come from.
Yeah.
So it's the 5 whys, but you can't ask why 5 times because they just get annoyed. So you have to learn the art of asking 5 whys.
Right. Otherwise, you're the little kid. Why, Dad? Why? Why is this guy blue?
But that's
why?
what I was.
Right.
So this is the thing, is being dyslexic is the greatest gift I ever got, because it forces me to learn through questions. The only way I could learn anything is through questions. So I was the annoying kid asking 500 questions, but the reality is that's how I got so good at this, because at some point as a dyslexic, I only learn by asking people questions. And the reality is we have all these weird statements around like, don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. That's just idiotic. Right?
I'm with you there.
I mean, I appreciate lawyers might not want to do that because that's their business, but at the same time, we got to ask questions we don't know the answer to. That's the power of this, right? The other thing is for me around questions is try not to, I always try to approach every conversation empty, like as an empty vessel. I don't know their story. And my job is to actually help frame their story, as opposed to, oh, they're just like so-and-so. Oh my gosh, that's just like somebody else. And you start to realize you end up inferring somebody else's story onto somebody because you're not listening.
Yeah. I'm listening, by the way, and I'm processing this.
I know.
You know, and the challenge, of course, for someone myself, is I have to be able to come up with the next question right away as I process what you're saying. The fact that folks aren't listening, I feel like, as a young salesperson, I mean, I sold books door to door and I sold books over the phone. I actually wrote about this for a foreword for a friend's book recently, where it wasn't until I watched the person who was really, really good at it, who was just expressing empathy throughout every single call, that I finally got it. I got off the script. I got into a rhythm and actually was able to sell enough. And I just feel so much time and energy in with marketing and sales and planning this thing out is here's the messaging framework. Here's what we're going to say. And here's how it's structured. And here's how and I wonder if that is kind of a disservice. I mean, yes, you do need to understand how your product is different from your competitors. You do need to, but the way it gets to be so prescriptive that listening is impossible. Because I got a script I got to get through.
That's why, like, I think a script works in some cases, but the reality is, like, I believe that you should have people who know how to have a conversation.
My first takeaway on this is you all need to, with your salespeople and your current marketers, you all need improv training.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the things I recommend to almost all the founders. Like, you need improv training because you need to get comfortable. Again, there's structure to improv. There's structure to how you have to think about it. It's not like handcuffs where it's just limiting you to say one thing.
Yeah, we had Matt Abrahams last year on this show, and then he joined us at the Super Huddle. And it was amazing because he's just so gifted at this. He offers a number of frameworks, and once you understand any one of those frameworks, you are ready for whatever question comes at your way. But
that's right.
And what that frees you up to do is to be a better listener. And that's what that's
the power of the framework. So I have probably too many frameworks, but the reality is, like, so for example, I go into talking to a customer with no questions at all. I just go in with the framework of the forces, what pushed them, right? And ultimately, what outcomes are they seeking? And ultimately I have to go in with the intent of, I have no idea what it is.
Right. And I don't see that happening at all. I really think that we have a series of buckets that we think the answers are going to be, and we're trying to find this match so we can put the red Lego on the red box and so forth. So that's so interesting is just this listening with, an open mind and an empty mind.
Yeah.
So, all right. Fascinating.
I know that might sound hard to do, but once you've done it, and what I'd say is I always talk about 1, 10, 100. Once you've done it 10 times, you start to realize that you actually have way better insights, and it's actually to your interest not to go in with all the information. So what was so interesting is, like, when I started to learn sales, they were trying to tell me everything about the person that I was going to go meet. I'm like, I want to know nothing about them. And like, no, you got to know everything about them. I'm like, no, I don't want to. I'm going to let them tell me. And they're like, they don't want to tell you. I'm like, I get it. But the fact is, here's the thing is, I'm going to ask them questions, and ultimately the questions will tell me everything I need to know. But if I take the information you gave me, I'm going to make so many assumptions about that information, and most of it is wrong.
Yeah. The assumptions word. All right. Well, Bob, thank you for sharing your insights with us. Before we wrap up, maybe you could leave the audience with one final thought about embracing demand side thinking and how that can really transform their approach to both marketing and sales.
Yep. I think the reality is that people are seeking progress. They're not seeking perfection. And so ultimately, to help them define the progress they're seeking and how your product or service can help them make that progress is what this is all about. And so and progress is that combination of problem and outcome. Progress to them is the combination of those things. And so ultimately, try to frame the progress people are trying to make.
Frame the progress that people are trying to make. It's progress, not perfection. I think those are some great places to end. So, and where can people find you?
Oh, LinkedIn's the best place. I've got a small boutique consulting firm. I do mostly startup product stuff and kind of sales and marketing stuff for startups. And then I teach at Northwestern in the venture creation or entrepreneur school.
Awesome.
So,
well,
LinkedIn's the best place to get a hold of me if you have any questions. Just link in, and I'm pretty good about it. Typically it'll be if you have something really long, I have to listen to it, and so sometimes it's just better to hop on the phone than it is to write me a long note.
Amazing. All right. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us. If you're a B2B CMO and you want to hear more conversations like this one, find out if you qualify to join our community of sharing, caring, and daring CMOs at cmohuddles.com. Renegade Marketers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neiser. Hey, that's me. This show is produced by Melissa Caffrey, Laura Parkin, and Ishar Cuevas. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, and learn more about CMO Huddles or my CMO coaching service, please visit renegademarketing.com. I'm your host, Drew Neiser. Until next time, keep those Renegade marketing caps on and strong.